My friends, let us consider that acuity is the refined clarity of thought and perception which enables one to discern subtle truths.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Acuity podcast, where we will be talking about politics and culture. Thanks a lot for joining us again. It's another rager of a week in terms of the news. We'll be discussing a wide range of topics, but a lot of it is going to center on the conversation that we started last week. We really encourage you to go and watch that podcast if you haven't. We talked about the Tumbler Ridge transgender shooter, one of Canada's worst tragedies. Joining me again today, this week, I am blessed and privileged to have the head of communications at Acuity Medical Law, Amy Hamm. So thank you so much, Amy, for joining again.
Thank you for having me. And I'll just say this week we are informally calling our episode Floor Crossers and Cross-Dressers.
Yeah, great. It's crazy how the news is can blend itself like that. The irony of all the news and how it lends itself to sort of a single kind of unique form of commentary is wonderfully ironic to me. It's a little bit more lighthearted this week. Of course, last week we were both in a pretty morose, dour position with the recency of that mass shooting. But we will touch base on a long list of things today. So what's on our agenda?
We both wanted to sort of move on. Let's move on to a new topic, but then the same topic kept coming back, and it had to do with, trans shooting, gender ideology. We'll get more into that, but I think what we first need to talk about is the latest news out of Canada is that we've now seen the third Conservative member of Parliament cross the floor and join the Liberal Party. So let me just pull up on the screen this announcement. So Mark Carney yesterday said he was honored to welcome Matt Jeneroux to his caucus, newest member of Canada's new government. And Canadians will recall that Matt Jeneroux at the end of last year claimed that he would be resigning from his position. He's an Alberta MP. He's been a Conservative for a very long time. He said he would like to focus on his family and that he would donate his earnings as a member of Parliament to various Edmonton charities. And so we didn't know, he sort of made his resignation in writing, but didn't officially resign apparently. And then out of nowhere, he comes out of the woodwork and he says, you know what, Mark Carney's speech for the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he invoked Havel's green grocer story in what we argued is a very inappropriate manner because it's about conformity. And I think we both think Carney is a conformist. And he said it was so inspiring that now he's crossing the floor and joining the Liberal Party. It's just... It's utter insanity. So people are really pissed off. To be clear, the Liberals still have a minority government. They are still 3 seats away from getting a majority government. And that is despite the fact that 3 Conservatives have sort of defected, but they've also had in their own party persons leaving the party. That includes Chrystia Freeland, who is now she's an economic advisor for the Ukrainian government. Bill Blair left. He became Canada's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. And then the Liberals also had this court case in Quebec about an extremely close election seat. And it was like a 1 vote difference. And so now a court has ruled that they have to have a by-election. So despite the fact that we've had 3 Conservatives, and we'll get more into who sort of defected and why, the Liberal Party still has a minority government. Canadians are pissed because you vote for, as much as you talk about you vote for your MP, people are ultimately voting for the party. They're voting for Pierre Poilievre. And to a lot of people, it doesn't even matter who their MP is. Like, honestly, they're just voting because they want whatever party to have a majority government in Canada.
I think you're totally right that it is a party dynamic in large part. It's much less about the specific member. This resonates with me. So I've done a lot of work for provincial elections, provincial government. I've done a lot of work for federal elections, federal government. And the idea that it isn't the party platform that drives the election is ridiculous. Of course, it's the party platform. The party pools resources, it supports you, it generates talking points. The applications that are used to try and help you when it's door knocking results and campaigning, all of that is supported by the party at large. So each of the floor crossers from the Conservative side, that was Michael Ma, Chris d'Entremont, and now Jeneroux, each of them are basically biting their thumbs at the party. It is also an insult to the citizens in that riding because they voted with a very specific intent, and crossing the floor is offense to each of them and each of their votes. I'm reminded of Dante's Inferno, the great poet from Italy. And in Dante's Inferno, the lowest layer of hell, the ninth circle, is devoted to the betrayers. And it's divided into 4 subcategories. And the worst grievance that you have that ends you in the bottom of the pit, just like Lucifer did to God, was against your Lord or benefactor. And so, in essence, this is a betrayal of each individual voter, for sure, to whom you owe a duty, but also to the quote-unquote Lord and benefactor, which is the party itself. So to me, this is absolutely disgusting. I find that to be especially the case in the Valley with Chris d'Entremont. He was very heavily supported by the party in order to win, and all 3 of them had marginal victories, but they all did win on the Conservative platform. But then for Jeneroux to say that he was going to withdraw and resign for what he described as his familial obligations and reasons, only to pretend, and I mean, in what world is it not a pretense that you are going to change your mind on your familial obligations, responsibilities, in light of a speech by the Prime Minister Carney, which has nothing to do with his policies. It has nothing to do with the platform shifting to the right. It has nothing to do with what you were elected on or who voted you in. To suggest that you were so inspired is a double affront. It's a double offense to the people to whom you owe an obligation. So I have not a single sympathetic word. I cannot steel man the position at all. I find it absolutely disgusting. And I've gone on Twitter and I've said that Chris d'Entremont is now an enemy. I will do everything I can to make sure that he has no business in politics in Nova Scotia going forward. And I strongly encourage everyone in Jeneroux's writing to do the same. That is absolutely disgusting. Even as a liberal, how can you trust somebody who's doing that when this is his alleged inspiration? It's not policies or outcomes that have happened as a consequence of the government, and whether it's economic prosperity or some trade dispute with the U.S. or all the hot button topics that Carney and his administration, his cabinet are trying to address. It was because of a speech in Davos, which is entirely inconsequential. So I do not understand it at all. I would be totally offended, and I wouldn't believe a word of his going forward, even if I was a Liberal supporter.
In theory, the idea of crossing the floor, which has been around since even before Confederation in Canada, floor crossing has always happened. It's not extremely common, but sort of the notion behind it is that if your party so reneges on their platform or does something so egregiously outside of what you would have expected them to do, you're not beholden to them, and you should be able to follow your conscience and cross the floor. But what we're seeing now is these people that it's extremely confusing. Like, why the hell is this guy crossing the floor? And like you said about a speech in Davos, that has nothing to do with politics. And he was all in as a Conservative for years. And it looks like something is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. It's skeezy and it pisses off voters so much. Like, what the hell is going on? Did he get stacks of cash? The last guy who defected, Michael Ma, who you mentioned, this happened literally the day after the Conservative Christmas party last year. So he's got these photos of himself one night schmoozing, schmucking it up with Conservatives, having a grand old time taking photos with them. And the next morning he joins the Liberal Party and crosses the floor. And everyone's like, what on earth is going on? This isn't the reason. There have been votes and attempted legislation to say maybe we shouldn't allow floor crossing, and it's never succeeded, I think, because on principle, it's something that in a democracy might be a good thing if it's used well by honest politicians. But it's like, what in the fuck is going on right now? It's crazy.
Yeah, I totally agree. You could imagine situations in which the party that you represent has drifted so far from the campaign promises that you have offered to your constituents that you feel psychologically, morally compelled to depart from that platform. Obviously, that has not happened on the Conservative side. There has been no change. I don't know, there's been no policy announcements. There's been no sudden shift in a platform. There's been no pivotal debate. They had the leadership conference recently that we talked about. Pierre won with an absolute super majority of support. So the Conservative Party is as rallied and as uniform as it's ever been. And then you have them departing. So you're totally correct. And on the other side, what was it of the Liberals that has suddenly changed? I don't get the sense that anything has changed. We don't have suddenly some kind of bolstering of a new policy direction. We don't have something, some prosperity-inducing mechanism that people are trying to support or would be particularly good for their individual ridings. What was it that enticed you to the Liberals, or what was it that offended you from the Conservatives that made you cross? And to your point about it as a democratic mechanism, really important as a democratic mechanism. People should not be compelled to stay in one position and support one side that they can no longer, it's not tenable. I don't see anything along those lines with these three individuals. I have to wonder if it is something else, like you said, something backroom, something promised, some position in government, or some position outside of government if they were to lose a subsequent election, some promise of future success. There has to have been something else that's motivating them, because right now I do not see anything that is remotely reasonable that should entice somebody to cross the floor in either direction, to be honest.
No. And when we don't see what's going on, we are left wondering. And then you see these theories, including about Michael Ma. Oh, is he sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party? Is that what is going on? And then you see Carney going in, well, I don't really feel like trying to even broker a deal with the United States anymore. I'm just going to make a new world order and hang out with China. And then it makes you feel like you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. But there's not enough transparency. And voters are being betrayed. People are sort of sharing this video in jest of Jeneroux right now when he sat down with Prime Minister Mark Carney to announce his defection from the Conservative Party. And a lot of people are joking about how uncomfortable, twitchy, and skeezy he looks. So I'll just play this little video right now.
Welcome, Matt. Welcome to the government team. It's a great honor to be on the same team as you at a crucial time for this city, for this province, for this country. I was going to serve as a special advisor on economic and security partnerships at this crucial time for our country as we're developing those. And we have signed now 19 agreements on the economic and security side in the last.
I think it reminded a lot of people, myself included, of the former relationship between Chrystia Freeland and our ex-Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, where she was very often standing behind Trudeau squirming, and everyone was wondering, what the hell is wrong with this lady? Like, is she on drugs? What's going on? This would be a frequent sight. And now it looks like Matt Jeneroux is going to be the next iteration of Chrystia Freeland acting like this.
I love these videos. I love all of this displays because it shows you how uncomfortable they are in their own skins, right?
Yeah.
Like the cognitive dissonance that they have to handle takes a psychological toll and manifests physically. Like, look at that. That's like so profoundly uncomfortable. It's so cringe. It's unbelievable.
What did you sell your soul for, Matt Jeneroux? Honestly, we would like to know.
And I love that how Carney has to sort of like backtrack and explain the wealth of experience. I mean, I had to look up while we were playing that, what is Matt Jeneroux's experience? I can't find any experience. Like, does he have some kind of huge entrepreneurial, industrialist experience that he's bringing to the Liberal Party? Doesn't seem like it's anything. So, I mean, again, it's the calling the distance. It's a series of lies. It's a series of illusions that are portrayed, down to his choice to resign and then his choice to come back and why and his motivations. I mean, like, all of this is smoke and mirrors. All this looks totally illusory.
If his experience is anything, he just spent November, December, January, February, maybe 4 months very seriously focusing on his family, apparently. But now he's like, no, I need to take an even larger role in government and get the hell away from my family. So if that's an indication of what this sort of experience this man has, then we should all be afraid, honestly.
Yeah, totally disgusting. Yeah, a traitor. Everyone should be morally offended by his decision and should not take him seriously as a human being or as a member of parliament going forward.
Just Canada in general, we're really on the global stage becoming a joke. We're becoming an entire joke. These are topics that we touch on every week too. It's like from MAID to the trans shooters to the media lies that we're seeing. People are looking out from outside of Canada onto our country as like morally bankrupt, so beholden by nonsense woke ideology that we're the laughing stock of the world. We're anti-science. Our economy is going to shit. We're just really we are not doing okay in Canada. The rest of the world is noticing how insane Canada is, and that includes Megyn Kelly, who we both love. So I just really want to play this clip of her talking about how absolutely ridiculous Canadian media is.
There was Global News did a report on Friday about what happened in Canada at that mass shooting we just discussed. And listen to how they reported it. It's SOT 3.
As Tumbler Ridge is grieving unimaginable loss, some community members are urging Canadians to resist division.
This is really a time to put that away and to really think about compassion and love.
Trans people are substantially more likely to be victims rather than perpetrators of violent crimes.
There's fear around different identities. What we know is that people don't do these things because of their individual identity.
Between 32 to 41% of trans people are estimated to have attempted suicide in their lifetimes due to stigma and discrimination, something a now removed Reddit account JessieBoy347, appearing to belong to Van Rootselaar, described. It really hurts. I am genuinely considering taking my own life.
Yeah, that's
just sheer propaganda. That's a Canadian news outlet. That's fucking propaganda. This is in the wake of this guy shooting over 30 people, 8 dead, 25 injured, and it's all about how the trans people are the real victims.
To Megan Kelly's point, it is propagandistic. It is. Of course, there's scattering of facts in there, and the rest of it, the framing is propagandistic. So the fact that that is the rate of suicidality in that community, they ascribe the reasons for that. They have no way of knowing that at all whatsoever. There's nothing definitive. That is entirely controversial. So there's no way to know that it is associated with stigma or community, the lack of support or bullying or anything along those lines. There's no way of knowing that.
No.
You might say that those are contributing factors. It's impossible to believe that they are not contributing factors, but to suggest that that is the cause of their suicidality is horrendously disinformation. Like, obviously.
To interject, the fact that they do this, the fact that they say this is what causes this 41%, which is not a real number, by the way, but to immediately say this is the cause, this is why. And then on the flip side, when you just try to say this is a trans shooter, and they're immediately like, don't even say that it was a trans shooter. You can't say it has anything to do with the shooting. It's like these trans activists are allowed to attribute whatever cause they want to whatever poor outcome they want, but they'll lose their fucking minds if you try to even ask a question about whether there's a correlation between trans and violence.
So I want to talk about that for a minute, because this came up in conversation with a lot of people who were sort of like rebutting or defending some of the points that we've made in our last week's episode. And it's worthwhile just doing a little bit of analysis on what are some of the factors, what are some of the consequences of the gender affirming care and the trans ideology at large. So the first thing when we're looking at mass shooters is very often mass shooting in general is defined as 4 or greater victims. So while that is a reasonable definition from a criminology point of view, from an overall statistics point of view, the problem is that looks at tremendous amounts and rates of violence that have nothing to do with a particular ideology or a particular hate-fueled ideology, right? So if a gang member goes into another gang house and ends up shooting at 4 or 5 or 6 people, that would be a mass shooting. But that is regular crime related. If somebody goes in to rob a liquor store and they're in the poor mental health state and they end up attacking multiple people inside that and shooting at them, that could qualify as a mass shooter. But the problem is that person is not psychologically well and they have gone in with the motivation of stealing. So if you separate all of those to what Jordan Peterson described as the nihilistic motivation, somebody who's out there seeking nothing except revenge, seeking nothing against except harm to society, harm against God, harm against the Creator, and the purpose of it is violence for violence's own sake, the number of mass shootings or assassination attempts in that spirit are far, far fewer. So a great example would be Columbine, right, in 1999.
Yeah.
So when we look at things like Columbine shooting, which is not motivated by some general utilitarian, whether it's theft or whether it's retribution or something along those lines, if we're looking at it violence for violence's own sake, and we look at the rates of transgenderism playing a role in that, the number of such instances skyrockets. So I looked at it from 1999 from Columbine until 2026. And I found that from the year 1999 until 2017, there were 24 such mass shootings. Again, that's 4 or more victims, for the purposes of hate alone, and there were
0
0 out of 24 until 2017. In 2018, 1 out of 5. In 2019, 1 out of 5. In 2021, 1 out of 3. In 2022, 2 out of 5, and so on and so on. So from 2017 and forward, when the trans ideology, when gender affirming care became far more mainstream, Abigail Schreier typically defines it after 2014, starting in 2015, we see an absolutely skyrocketing rate, especially if we consider what is the representative sample of that population in society, which is anywhere between 1 and 2 and 3%, depending on how you slice that. So it's a monumental consideration in terms of the violence for violence's own sake.
It's very clear to me that you can see that it's something we should be looking at the very least. And if you sort of discretize the numbers in the way that you did, you do see a pattern. And for people who are just so offended and say, well, you shouldn't even be looking at all, those people don't care about violence and about the chaos and about the death and even about the suffering of these trans people that are committing these crimes, because these are clearly extremely disturbed people that need a lot of mental health help that they're not getting. And so it's like you care more about protecting this sort of identity class of people than you do even about the well-being of these people, because it's becoming pretty freaking obvious that something is afoot and we should at least be asking questions.
I totally agree. And one of the things that they like to cite is the amount of violence and crime that is perpetrated against this community. And that is fair. That is an entirely reasonable thing to put into context. The problem is that a lot of people within that community are suffering from violence by their own community. The same way that the vast majority of Black victims of crime are by Black perpetrators. And so if you want to be compassionate to that group of people and they warrant compassion, then actually you have a much greater emphasis on examining what is it that's going on in this community that is perpetrating the violence against them. I just want to bring up, because in my research, I was looking at what evidence exists to support the claim that there is a rise in transgender-related violence. The best evidence that I found from a large-scale view actually comes from the UK, secondary to Freedom of Information requests. And so a series of Freedom of Information requests were put out in the UK, and you can see what is the rate of transgendered individuals who are occupying prison. So in 2016, there were 70 individuals. In 2017, there were 125. That's an increase of 80%. If you go from 2017, we're 125. In 2025, there are almost 350. Every year, there has been a rise of between 10 and 50% of the absolute number of transgendered individuals ending up in prison. That rate of change is spectacular if you consider what it is that the absolute number of people identify in this community.
What you were saying about the levels of violence too reminds me, because women hear this all the time about, you're not the victims of violence. Trans women, and especially trans women of color, are the victims of violence way more than you are. These numbers are used against us because a lot of what's used is a poll, especially from Brazil, where there are a lot of transgender identified males that are working in prostitution. And so they'll look at the numbers of male prostitutes that are transgender being murdered there, and they'll use that to sort of extrapolate to the entire world and suggest that this is a problem that is somehow like worse for this population, as if a trans person who is like a young female teenager who just started identifying as trans last year in Canada would be at the same risk of violence as a male prostitute in Brazil who's identifying as a woman and is out on the streets doing drugs and selling sex. It's like, these are not
fantastically different.
People.
Couldn't be further apart. It's just like so ridiculous, right? I mean, like, could you imagine trying to extrapolate from one population, one demographic to another, different country, different population profile, different age group, different occupation, different everything. In every way, polar different people.
And that's what they do, is they just try to use whatever justification, whatever numbers they need for in the service of an ideology. It's not even in the service of the people who are within their protected community, because they're not doing any favors to those people either when they tell these lies. And I know we spoke about, next week on the podcast, we'll maybe pivot. We're not going to have to talk about trans issues again. And then lo and behold, we had within the same week, and I shared this on social media, I saw this shooting at a hockey rink. 2 people were killed, and then the shooter committed suicide. And so I shared it. I'm like, oh, this is horrible. Minutes after sharing it, I start seeing, it's another trans identified male. And I'm like, what? Okay, then we saw the same sort of rigmarole with Canadian media going and not revealing the sex of the shooter. Here's Global News Canada. A person who opened fire Monday during a youth hockey game at an ice rink in Rhode Island killed their ex-wife and one son, authorities say. How much gaslighting are we supposed to put up with in Canada? I'm so absolutely so sick of it. And these crimes have been so horrific. Innocent people have lost their lives. You would think that if anything good would come out of it, it would be some sort of reckoning. And yet all we're seeing is the left going into hyper drive to try to propagandize us and to try to lie even more and to try to smear us as bigots for asking the right questions about how we can possibly prevent more of this violence.
The gaslighting is very real, especially in Canada. We're arguably the worst country in the world for that, especially from our legacy media institutions, who are, once again, arguably the worst in the world for that. But when it comes to the overall fight against both reality and in support of the victims, whoever those victims are, we are fortunate in that we are seeing a massive withdrawal from gender affirming care across North America. So, of course, this started as a consequence of the Cass review in the UK and the Tavistock Clinic closing. The Tavistock Clinic was the central location. It was supposed to be centralized gender affirming care with all the specialties and everyone involved. And it turned out that that was a travesty, that the outcomes were horrendous, that it made no difference for people's overall mental health. And so instead, it was replaced with regional centers and psychological counseling. So the UK is 3 or 4 years ahead of us where we are today, but obviously this is now trickled to the US. So today I noted that there was a report on hospitals that cater to children pausing or canceling their gender affirming care programs. So NYU Langone, Children's Hospital in Minnesota, the University of Utah, Multicare, Mary Bridge Children's in Washington, Rady's Children's Health in California, that's in California, mind you, Lurie's Children's Hospital in Colorado, and so on and so on. There's a very long list of hospitals as institutions. And we saw last week, we had noted briefly about the American Society of Plastic Surgeons that in February 4th or the 6th issued a statement saying that they recommend delaying any kind of gender affirming care until patients have passed puberty, so into the 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I believe that it's going to be delayed even further than that, but at least that's a very strong marker. And then the American Medical Association following 5 days later, saying that they are also recommending people delay and that it become much more singular focus. So in very particular patients under very particular circumstances, that it might be reasonable to consider before puberty or during puberty. So two very large medical bodies changing their positions and many hospitals changing their positions. So the fight seems to be going, thankfully, because of outwork by people like yourself, people being outspoken like J.K. Rowling, and of course all the incentives, now most recently in New York with that detransitioner winning a very large civil suit case, $2 million in reward. So the force is starting to move and starting to change. And I would bet, unfortunately, that 2026 is going to be a particularly horrendous year when it comes to trans-related violence. When those people who are already mentally disturbed, who are on a million different types of medications that are going to cloud your senses, who are already very vulnerable, and I would say that they are already quite spiritually vulnerable, are going to have a tremendous backlash to the perspective that they are losing the fight. So already in 2026, we've seen two, one in Canada, one now in Rhode Island. And I hate to prophesize that this trend will continue, but I anticipate that it's going to get much worse. And that 2026 will be a particularly bad year for that.
It's evil to tell children, it's evil to tell youth that they're under attack by people who hate them and want what's worse for them and want to deprive them of life-saving care, when the opposite is true, and that the entire world is waking up to a global medical scandal. That is what all of the evidence points to. And it's feeding into I don't want any more violence either, but I'm also worried about it. People, including, we've seen in Canada, the BC Teachers Union, the BC Nurses Union, even my local New West School District, in the aftermath of this Tumbler Ridge shooting, just like Megan Kelly called out, their primary concern seemed to not be the victims of the violence, but to just sort of coddle the trans community and go, oh, the stigma, the hate, the shame. it's not your fault, and sort of like they made you do it, and if only they would be nice to you, then this sort of stuff wouldn't happen. It's like I don't want to make crazy accusations, but I sort of feel like they're encouraging further violence and hatred against people who, I'm not a hateful person. I don't hate anyone who's trans. I would like to stop the worst medical scandal of our time. It's horrific, and especially for youth. But you even said you would like the age for adults getting this gender affirming care to be higher as well. I generally say I don't care what consenting adults want to do to their bodies, but you also have to look at the treatments and the surgeries, and the fact that, like, number one, trans can be used as a catch-all to ignore other mental health problems, so that it's like fix your gender dysphoria, and then your depression, your anxiety, what schizoaffective, all of this will go away. No, it's not going away. It's not solving all those problems. And then number two, you're adding hormones, which will affect people's behavior, moods, mental stability in enormous ways. And number three, the surgeries are frankly fucking horrific. Having your genitalia removed and a permanent wound that you have to dilate every day. And for the women that want to get a fake penis, it's like you destroy your forearm. Some people lose function in their arm to have this like horrific looking, not at all real, sort of fake genitalia added to their body. These surgeries are not good. They're really not.
Right. And so there is a component of weaponized compassion here, right? That the compassion has to only ever go one way. That and that weaponization is tied to specific behaviors or activities. So the only people who are compassionate are the ones who want more of this for you. And therefore, the ones who want something different for you are not compassionate. And that couldn't be further from the truth. To your point, they have all my sympathy in the world. I do not know how horrendous it must feel to have those feelings about yourself, about your body, and so on. But the perspective that we are coming from, with the delay, the wait and see, especially outside of pre-puberty, patients who can't provide fully informed consent, parents who cannot provide fully informed consent on behalf of their children, et cetera, et cetera. The point is that this is from a perspective of compassion. It is from a perspective of compassion, and we should not cede that territory to adversaries making a different argument, that the only compassionate route is to affirm, right? My perspective is that people who do continue to affirm that, those ones are the ones who are actually being insulting. They are being offensive. There is no compassion, right? That is a malevolent force. Now, they might say that the malevolent force is us because we're saying that they should wait and see, but neither side can claim solely to be on the moral ground by advocating their perspective on how to manage patients who feel like this. And so I do not think that it is inherently virtuous to say affirm. I think that it is morally repugnant to say that, especially in children, minors, and those who cannot consent. And on that note, I don't know if you saw, Amy, that I noted today that WPATH, it is the international organization that has created the standards of guidelines and policies by which almost all other practitioners of gender affirming care base their science on, is now being investigated by the FCC in the US, as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics, for knowingly producing standards and guidelines contrary to the medical evidence. So basically for politicizing their science-based beliefs, for politicizing their evidence, and then by that perpetrating a mass harm to individuals. And if you think about it, this is another reason why I am so sympathetic to this population. To some extent, okay, every person is entitled to a certain responsibility for their actions. And if you don't know, you have a responsibility to learn, to understand, to ask questions. But if the authorities that you are asking those questions from are the ones purveying the evil, purveying the misinformation, and pushing you, empowering you, directing you to go down a path that is horrendous, that is traumatic, that is counterproductive, ultimately, I put a much greater degree of the blame on those people. And it's the same thing that we noticed with COVID. It's one of the reasons that I went into the profession that I now did, is because the average person does not have the capacity to understand what are the evils associated with the public health policies that are being put forward. They don't have the knowledge base, they don't have the sense of authority to be able to push back against the elites and the institutions. It is those elites and those institutions who have a much greater role. They are the ones who either did know better or who ought to have known better against the societal evils that they are perpetrating. So I put a huge emphasis on the blame on those people rather than the individuals.
I agree. We were both working in healthcare. I believe it was in 2014, somewhere around there, that there was actually a really bad Ebola outbreak. And someone got on a plane to America. And then there was a little mini Ebola outbreak somewhere in America, but I think it was ultimately isolated to one household. But working in a Canadian Health Authority at the time, I remember getting the emails just from public health going, okay, this, it's in America. Here's what we do if someone with these like a hemorrhagic fever symptoms shows up in our hospital, and these are all of the steps that we have to take. And I took it so seriously, and I just complete and utter trust, and thinking like this is serious business. And then after you see the medical scandal with gender affirming care, and then after you see the mismanagement of public health during COVID, now I'm like, we're totally screwed. If anything serious happens again, we're totally screwed. I don't believe a word that anyone says in a position of public health authority, which is probably to my own detriment. But it's like, no, all trust has been eroded. Well, how do we even move on from this? I really don't know.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard. I mean, like, you have these people, whether it's Dr. Marty or Dr. Bhattacharya in positions, or even RFK Jr. at the NIH, Health Human Services, the CDC, and they're trying their best to reestablish the sense of trust in society. But I mean, that is a monumental task. In Greece, we have an expression that I would rather lose an eye than lose my reputation. And it's so much harder to rebuild a reputation when it's been tarnished, when it's been lost. We have a massive fight ahead of us.
We do, especially in Canada, where things, like you said, we tend to be a few years behind the UK or even the US culturally, which, to an extent, you would think that would be compressed the more that we live online and that we share media and everything. I think there's probably more to it now. It's that it's so, like, wokeness is so entrenched in Canada, and this sort of Canadians' meekness and ability to just go along with whatever they're told. It's baked into our culture. Maybe I'm just feeling extremely pessimistic about Canada and Canadians right now. It's really gotten to me over the last few weeks. What the hell is it going to take for things to finally turn around?
Speaking of how insane things are in Canada, I think that we're going to talk about that Montreal salon and damages they pay to their non-binary customer. So as everyone knows, if you're going to go to a hairdresser, a salon, or a barber, you pick, do I have a men's haircut? Do I have a woman's haircut? There's a price point difference between them, presumably because of the length of the hair, the types of hair that's involved. I'm not a hairdresser. I have long hair, but I check off a women's haircut. I don't identify as a woman because I think that my hair is probably longer in terms of the timeline that I would have to occupy from the hairdresser. So what happened with this person in Montreal?
A human rights tribunal granted only $500. We've seen worse. Someone in BC, they're a non-binary, same as in this case, waitress that was misgendered at work. They were given $30,000. So granted, this is only $500 because they had this non-binary person had to go online. What a horrible thing that they had to go through. They had to either select male or female for a haircut. I can't imagine the pain of going through that, but they went through that, and now they've been given $500 for their pain and suffering. When you consider the millions of dollars that are spent to run these human rights tribunals, I'm sure the ultimate cost of this nonsense runs, maybe $500,000, maybe $1 million, who knows? Sort of the funniest part, funny in like, I'm also crying as I'm laughing. It's some kind of inception moment with regards to wasting taxpayer dollars, because this person also is an employee for Environment and Climate Change Canada. Oh,
isn't it spectacular? I mean, like, this is one of my favorite things about Canada. To your point about, you can laugh at it instead of cry, but it's just so horrendous. I mean, like, what a joke. What an absolute farce. Who could take such a country seriously, right? I mean, like, you think to yourself, actual backwards countries, Somalia, some sub-Saharan country, like poor Eritrea, Ethiopia, they would hear this and think to themselves, that doesn't sound good. Like, I don't want to live there. That sounds crazy. That's cartoonish. It's so farcical.
We don't even have the basics down. We don't even know who a man is. We don't know who a woman is. We don't even know what justice or pain or suffering means anymore. If we're awarding people money for pain and suffering for having to check a fucking male or female box.
Yeah,
this is just, it's so far removed from the history of any sort of human rights movement. It happens with the misgendering. What even is non-binary anyways. Nobody's ever been able to give a sufficient answer. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just really privileged, generally older white people who have way too much time on their hands to sit around and think about the notion of gender as some sort of like religious or philosophical concept in regards to themselves. Just go read a goddamn book about something other than yourself.
I think Gadsad has said it best. I think it was Gadsad who said, when the demand for human rights issues so grossly outweighs the supply, this is the level of complaint that we have to humor and address in society. So I'm like, the demand for racism is so high, and the supply of racist incidents is so spectacularly low. You have to go out there and fabricate all these nonsense and these issues when there are like actual economic disasters that are happening in Canada. We have human rights tribunals eating up public taxpayers' cash.
On that note, thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the Acuity podcast, Politics and Culture. We will be back next week to discuss more. There's always more, unfortunately. And by the way, drop us a line if there's something that you want us to talk about or address, because we would be happy to get into it. And thank you so much for listening to our podcast.
My friends, let us consider that acuity is the refined clarity of thought and perception which enables one to discern subtle truths.